Hey guys, today I'm going to take you through doing a brake job. Now this is going to cover most vehicles out there. What I have is a 2012 Kia Soul, and this is absolutely nothing special. Standard brake disc setup on both front and rear axles. No sensors, nothing weird about it. This is going to cover probably 90% of the vehicles on the road today. And I'm going to be doing the front, I'm going to be doing the pads and the rotors. So it's going to be complete. And this is a Southern vehicle. It was originally from Ohio, so there might be a little bit of rust in there. We'll see. I bought this 1 year used, very few miles on it, but there are a tiny little bit of rust spots that I see on some wear parts, like the hinge latch here. So I can tell it was definitely spending a little time up north before it got down to me here in Florida. But overall, this is going to be really clean. I've done a lot of brake jobs when I lived up in Michigan, and those can be hell. You can run into a ton of corrosion and rust, so you may need to take additional steps past what I'm going to show you here for removing things such as bolts and nuts. Now, I'm doing a slight brake upgrade at the same time here. This is nothing dramatic. It's still completely stock replacement as far as the types of parts that are going back on. I have replacement rotors here, and instead of being solid, they are cross-drilled and slotted. Now, whether or not this kind of obviously non-performance vehicle needs these is kind of irrelevant, because these come on just about every kit out there. But they should help a little bit in the rain, which we certainly do get here in droves in the Tampa area. So went ahead and got those. And if you do get these as opposed to stock solid rotors, make sure you pay attention to which are the passenger and driver parts, because the orientation of these is directional. But these simply bolt on, standard size, nothing special there. Brake pads, I went with high performance ceramic. I do like the ceramic as opposed to the basic asbestos based pads that you'll find for 10 bucks at the auto store. They stop a little bit better. They are better in the wet, and they stay a lot cleaner. They stop a lot of the brake dust from accumulating all over your wheels. And these come with new hardware here to clip them into the calipers. The calipers, we reuse the stock parts from the vehicle. And I've got a little tube of brake lubricant, and I've got a can of brake cleaner, and this is simply to clean the rotors, which have a lot of lubrication and rust protection and mold release agent from the factory that needs to be removed before you start them. Now, I highly recommend that you use gloves, whether or not you want to use a pair of mechanics gloves or just a cheap pair of disposable plastic, rubber gloves, latex, whatever. Saves you so much cleanup, believe me. It's worth it. I spent, I don't know, 15 bucks on a huge box of them. They last me for years. Awesome there. Now, I've got these locking lug nuts on mine, and I'm going ahead and putting back the regular ones. These came with the vehicle. I don't think anybody out there is interested in stealing a stock pair of Kia Soul wheels, so those are just kind of a hassle. If the key is ever damaged or lost, you are screwed. And I've had that happen. I've had shops break my keys before, so just taking those off. Now, before you begin, safety, absolutely number one. You have to be using solid supports. Whether or not you're up on ramps or jack stands, or if you're using a jack with a locking pin, that's what you need to do. Never, ever, ever try any of this with a scissor jack or a ratchet jack or anything that comes with your vehicle. You need to use professional lifting tools. All right, that is simply so you don't freaking injure or kill yourself. That's no joke. So, first thing we do is set the parking brake on the vehicle, because the front is coming up off the ground, and you don't want it rolling around. So parking brake is on. We need to open up the brake fluid reservoir, because this pressure is going to change as we squeeze the calipers together. That is going to make the fluid rise in there, and we need that pressure to be relieved. And if it was overfilled, that might actually overspill, but mine's at the correct level, so it shouldn't be an issue. Alright, so got the brake on. I'm going to go ahead and start by loosening up the lug nuts. You just want to get them loose enough where you don't have to really crank on it, because once that's up in the air, and it doesn't have the resistance of sitting on the ground, it's really hard to remove those things without the whole thing spinning. So do yourself a favor and loosen them while it's still on the ground. But obviously don't take them off, don't even get them close to taking them off while it's still supporting the vehicle. I'm going to go ahead and do that and stick this on a tripod and we'll get going. It's really easy. Okay, now we get into some of the nitty-gritty. Don't be intimidated by this. This is really simple. I mean, it really doesn't get any easier than this for a suspension or a brake job. Lots of room in here. Pretty much any SUV is going to look the same. Got a strut and spring. I'm not going to touch anything with those. It's just a couple things to be aware of here. One, we're going to be taking off this caliper assembly. Now, if I was just doing a brake pad replacement, I wouldn't have to take all of this off. I would just be taking half of it off and replacing the pads. But here's the deal. Back in the day, these rotors, ooh, these are still kind of warm. These rotors back in the day were a heck of a lot thicker. And you were able to what's called turn these, which is basically just shaving a little bit of material off here to make them perfectly flat in between brake jobs. So you could replace your pads, turn your rotors, and do that 2 or 3 times before this piece, this big solid chunk of metal, had to be replaced. But today, mostly to save weight, you do get a little bit better performance because without a lot of extra weight here hanging out on the end of the wheel, you get better fuel economy because it's less for the car to accelerate. It's less for the suspension to move up and down, less wear and tear on the strut and spring assembly. So there are advantages to having a lighter rotor on your car, but you do pay for it because now you are lucky if you can turn your rotors once. A lot of vehicles out there, every single time you do a brake job and your pads wear out, you got to replace your rotors too. And these aren't especially cheap. Basic ones, you can get them for 20, 25 bucks for a real piece of junk. Stock OEM ones, they can be 60, 70, 80 bucks. High performance ones, well, they go up from there. Now the kit I got came with the rotors and the pads matched for this vehicle, all in one box, and it was a really good deal. I got a set for the front axle, so 2 sets for 120 bucks. That's not bad at all. Alright, now the first thing we have to do is take off this caliper assembly. And this is simply a hydraulic piston squeezing like this. Well, squeezing from one end, and this end just kind of floats. And then you've got pads, just like on a bicycle, squeezing against this metal. And that's how it stops the car. The only important thing we have to remember here is this always needs to be supported, because as soon as we take it off and unbolt it, this is the only connection it's going to have to the car, this little flimsy brake line. You do not ever want to support this by this brake line. Okay, this is not a tension item. It will be damaged if you let this hang off of this. So what we're going to do is simply hang this off of the spring up here. You can use a wire, you can use a zip tie, whatever you want. Just make sure it's hanging supported by itself, not on this. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that now. And it's super easy, just 2 bolts. There's one here, and there's one here. So just 2 bolts that go into here. We're going to take the bolt out, and this whole center piece will swing right out. All we need to do is get an appropriately sized wrench to go on this inner nut, and then a socket to go on the nut, on the bolt, sorry. So I'm going to go ahead and find the right ones, and the specific size is going to be different for each vehicle, so figure out exactly what size you need for your vehicle. Alright, now what I've got here is a 17-inch open wrench for this nut and a 14-inch close end on this bolt. Now if you got a Kia Soul, that's what you need. Probably a lot of other Kias too. If you don't have what I'm working on, it may be different. Just figure out exactly what sizes you want. You just need this one on here to hold it steady while you back this bolt out. And I've got this piece of wire here. You can use metal wire. This is for hanging a picture frame. I just happen to have a lot of this around. You can snip off a little section of coat hanger. This isn't terribly heavy, but you don't want to use something flimsy like a little piece of yarn or string. You could use a shoelace, anything that's going to just be able to tie this up someplace secure so you don't have tension on that. That's the only point. No big deal. So let's go ahead and break this loose, tie it up out of the way, and then we can get our brake pads out. And there's not much torque on this. Doesn't take anything special. Now in some vehicles, you may need to replace these bolts every time you take them out. On some vehicles, you may need to replace these little boots or fill them with grease. Consult with your service manual. There's nothing special I need to do on this. But I have had vehicles, a lot of GMs for some reason are like that. These are usually one-time only bolts on GMs. There's really no reason to do that, except to spend more money on parts. That's the top. I'm going to go ahead and do the bottom here. Okay, 2 bolts are out, caliper is loose. So now I'm going to carefully figure out where I want to put this wire first. I'm just going to loop it around one of the spring coils here. And this just wiggles out. Nothing special. Okay, so this is the caliper assembly. This is as cheap as they get. This is a single piston caliper. Right here is the piston, and it's just basically like an upside down cup. The back is solid, and behind that is your brake fluid. That provides your hydraulic pressure, and it pushes this cup this way, and it squeezes these pads against the metal. That's all there is to brakes. I mean, they're really simple. The better caliper assemblies will have multiple pistons. Might have 2 smaller ones. That gets you more closing pressure against the pad rather than just contacting right here. You have it contacting here. And the even better ones have pistons on both sides. So you've got 4 of them squeezing it. But those are for sports cars. Absolutely not needed whatsoever for a family economy vehicle like this. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this guy up. Doesn't take anything special, only weighs a few pounds. Like I said, just keep all the pressure off that brake line, and that's all you need to do. So if this can support a big old picture, it can support a brake caliper. There we go. That's just sitting there out of the way. We'll get to him later. We don't need to do anything with that until we're reassembling, so he just sits there. Next thing we're going to do is pop out our brake pads. Now these are not terribly, or at least they shouldn't be, terribly used yet. These were not giving me the telltale signs that they really needed to be replaced. The primary reason I'm doing this is because these suck. It's not performing poorly, it's performing to spec, but I'm just not impressed with the performance of these. I had to do an emergency stop one day, totally dry, normal roads, and I just didn't like the stop time. It was not that impressive, so I'm going to put this brake kit on. These should Sometimes a little mallet helps. These should pop out pretty easily. The brake pads are just sitting in here. Just wiggle them out, come out real easy. And you can see there's plenty of meat left on these. This is kind of a good wear groove to go by. These are less than half used. Okay, so they did not need to be replaced as far as time is concerned. You can see all the grit that comes off of these. These are normal non-ceramic pads, and this is what creates all your brake dust and your mess all over your wheels. And these really don't stop that well. These are just factory stock. Okay, nothing special about them whatsoever. On the inside one, you'll notice a metal tab right here. This is what tells you to change your brakes. When you hear brakes squealing, that's this little piece of metal right here, just this little part that's sticking up, contacting the rotor. That means all of this has worn down, and it's almost flat with this bottom metal part. All this part here is your brake pad itself. This is wear material. When this is gone and it gets down to this bottom metal piece, then you need to do a brake job. Okay, then it's time. And this little piece of metal here starts to dig in here, and you hear the ee when you hit a stop. Okay, that's your warning device. That's what is on cheap cars, base metal cars, most cars out there. The better cars will have sensors, and they work exactly the same way. Instead of a piece of metal here making a squealing noise, it's a little piece of electric wire. And normally the electric wire is in a loop, so you have a signal going through it. And when the electric wire gets worn down, because the brake pad is worn down and it makes contact, it breaks that wire. And that trips the light on the dash that says, brake job, brakes are low. Problem is, you got to replace that sensor every time. It's not just a cheap little tab of metal, it's a $40 sensor. So when you have those, add that into your cost of doing a brake job. Usually there's only one sensor on the front and one on the back. It's not on all four wheels. So at least you don't have to buy 4 sensors when you do a brake job, only 1 or 2. But nothing beats the cheapness of a simple little piece of metal making some noise for free. All right, so there's the brake pads. Hang on to these because we're going to use these, or at least one of them here, for reassembly, and I'll show you that. Okay, the next thing we have to do is take off this mounting piece. This is what just holds on to the brake pads, and we're going to reuse this. And again, there are just 2 bolts that are right next to the other 2 bolts that we took out, and those are holding this to the spindle. So I'm going to go ahead and take those off, and it looks like those are probably the same 17-inch size as the bigger nuts were. Yes, they are. These might take some force because these are on here to hold everything together. Wow. Yeah, those are on there with some force, and let me tell you what, there's a good reason not to use piece of shit cheap tools. I believe I got these from AutoZone a long time ago. Cheap pot metal tools. Broke that wrench like a freaking piece of pasta. That was not that much torque on there. That was just by hand. So, time to go in my workroom and find a better wrench. Preferably something like Craftsman. Stand by. Okay, let's try that again. one loose, get the bottom one here. Get some better leverage. Of course, if you have air tools, it makes this much simpler, but it's certainly not needed. You can also, of course, use a socket, but not needed. Comes right up by hand when it's loose. And there should be a washer on these. Yep. So make sure you keep track of that washer. Helps use the right side. Okay, so there we've got the brake pad bracket. These metal clips here get replaced, and those came with the new brake kit. Just set this aside. And remember, like I said, check your manual to see if you need to replace these little rubber boot assemblies or not. A lot of GMs you do. Alright, next step is we are going to remove the rotor. Now I want to show you a little problem. There are different ways that the rotors can be located onto the hub assembly. Now in the case of this Kia, they use two little really soft Phillips head screws. These are not holding the rotors on. They're held onto the car by the wheel and the lug nuts. These are here to simply keep it in position, basically, while you're reassembling it. Especially in the case of an up north car, which I think this is running into that problem because I see a lot of rust around the hub here in the center. So I might even have a hard time taking this off without using a hammer. But these screws are not coming out for me. If you run into that problem, or if you have some other kind of locating pin, you can drill these out. Just drill the head off in order to get the rotor off. Okay, they're not necessary for the function of the rotor at all. Now, it's also very critical to use the correct bit. You don't want to use one that's the wrong size. Now, my first attempt here started to strip out the screw, and it was not budging. I'd given it a couple whacks, and even just wrapping it fairly gently with the hammer was starting to deform the metal in this screw. So it is a very soft metal. Just a really horrible combination of things to do. So I'm going to give it one more shot. I tried it first with my cordless drill, didn't have enough torque, so I'm going to use my electric drill here. Just need to find my adapter real quick, and we'll give it one more shot, and if it strips out, it strips out. I'll just go ahead and drill off the heads, and then we can remove the rotor. Alright, back in action here. I had to take a break because my phone ran out of battery. I've been shooting video that much today. But anyway, here's what has to happen. These do need to be drilled out, and it's actually not a big deal at all. The only important thing is that you need to use the correct drill bit. You need a high strength drill bit, something for drilling through metal. So you don't want to use anything that's, for example, for drilling through wood, because that's just going to dull your tip and you're going to sit there and heat up the screw and nothing's going to happen. So all you need is a little WD-40 or other kind of silicone spray or penetrating fluid, just as a little bit of lubrication. And of course it'll vary by vehicle. This is a 1/4 inch drill bit. This is the same diameter as the hole in the new rotors, so you can just match it up that way. And all I'm doing is drilling into the screw, and it doesn't go down far. About 1/8 of an inch is all it takes, and then the head just pops off. And then basically what you're left with is just a little locating stud, a little bit of the screw that's still in there, and that's all you need. And the new rotor is going to go right over that. So I'm just going to drill through here. I'm going to squirt it a couple times to clean it out and lubricate it, and it should just take a few seconds here. There we go. So here's the head of the old screw. That's just garbage. And now we should be able to take the rotor off. It's probably going to take a little tap with a hammer. Given that those screws were stuck on there, and I do see some rust here around the hub. So like I said, the car came from Ohio for the first 15,000 miles of its life, so it doesn't shock me. So I'm going to go ahead and just gently wrap on the back of the rotor here, and it should just slide off the studs. Might have a little bit of a hang up from the residue of those screw heads, but it doesn't really matter. Just make sure you don't hit any other parts except the rotor. This rotor is garbage, so it doesn't matter if we warp it or anything, so don't worry about that. Well, that was all rust. There's absolutely no part of the screws left, so that was just stuck on there from being a northern car. So that was it. That's the hardest part about doing a brake job. Now it's simply reassembly. First thing we have to do is prep our new rotors. Took it out of the bag here. I grabbed the wrong one. First thing I was going to say is make sure you have the right one. If they're directional, they will be labeled driver or passenger. So let me grab the driver's side here. And all we need to do to these is clean them off. This is what the brake cleaner is for. These have a lot of residue from the factory. They have basically grease on the surfaces, and of course grease is not good for stopping. So I'm going to take this out front. This is very nasty stuff, so do it in the driveway, out on your road. If you have a painted driveway, don't do it over the paint because it'll eat right through it. Don't get anywhere near the finish on your car. So I'm going to go clean these off real quick. What you have to do is right back. Line up the rotors on the studs with where those screw holes were, not that it makes any real critical difference. So I've got the driver's side, and I've got this screw just to the left of this stud, so this is where it goes on. And it'll just sit there. And you can see the point of those screws were just to keep this flat like this while we go through reassembly. It's not critical, because once you put the wheel on and cinch it down, it all sits in the right position. So just set it up there. You can just let it sit like that. And now we're going to go ahead and put the caliper assembly back on. We need the 2 long bolts for the back half. Had to move everything around here because in the middle of the video a guy came to replace the windshield, so I had to stop here. Okay. Let's see, that was a 17 and a 14. This one was just a 17. We need to pop out these metal brackets. So we've got new ones that go with the new brake kit. So we can put those in. Sometimes these are all universal, doesn't matter where they go. Sometimes they are different, left to right, or I should say front to back on the bracket. So just check yours. These, I believe, should be all the same. Yep. So they pop back on. Now this goes back in place. Just be careful when you're going over the new parts. You don't need anything gouged. Kind of hard to see what I'm doing here because I've got funny angles so you guys can see what I'm doing. Normally I'd kind of be on my back or down low doing this. Just got to find the thread here to start. Alright, you know what? Do need to get down low. Just can't see it. Okay, now we need to tighten these down to spec. And again, if in doubt, check your service manual. But in general, these are going to be pretty tight, around 35 foot-pounds. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and put on the new brake pads. There's not going to be any difference left to right, but there is inside to outside. Remember, the tab for the low pad warning goes on the inside. You'll see the slight curvature of the pad matches the curvature of the brake. They just fit down in there. What you want to do is make sure everything goes in the right grooves. This groove here is for this little part sticking out, and this goes down into here. And these metal tabs bend a little bit, but they keep them snug. That's the whole point of these, is just to keep them stuck in place. Okay, now we need a little anti-seize, and the point of this is to stop squeal and vibration. When you have this piston compressing and squeezing these brake pads, there's contact between this circle part and the pad, or these end fingers and the pad. And whenever you have solid part contact like that, when there's any kind of vibration, which of course there is during braking, you get sound and noise. So what this does is just put a little bit of lubrication, basically like Vaseline, in between those parts, so you don't get the noise. You still get the pressure and the contact, but there's that slight film buffer. All you need is a real thin coating. I like to just put it real thin over the back of the pad. You don't want it oozing out anywhere, so you just want a real thin little coat. You of course don't want any of this to touch the front side of the pads or the rotor. Then you wouldn't have very good brakes. And I got to get in and do the other pad. This is all it takes, just a little pea-sized amount. You can put it on your finger too if you want to. Now in these brakes, on these pads, they put a little section, it's like a piece of plastic or might be a thin metal, to show you exactly where you need to apply this stuff. It's different on the inside and the outside pad. Here, I'll show you on these two that I haven't put on. Let's switch my gloves too, because now these are all goopy. And I don't want any of that touching the other parts. That's why I like the disposable gloves. I think I've been through 5 sets during this video. So you can see on the back here, they give you these, I'll call it a backing plate. That's where you can apply your anti-seize. This side here is where these two big fingers are pressing down. So they're pressing right here. This piece on the inside, it's only being contacted by this round piston. So it's just contacting here. So just gives you a nice convenient little place, lets you know this is where contact is and this is where contact is. So this is the part you need to put the anti-seize on. Real simple. Alright, next step, as I trip over my tools, is to compress the piston so that we can slide it over our new pads. Now this one, because the old pads still pretty much were brand new, here I'll show you the difference between what I took off. Oh, see, I didn't put on new gloves, now my hands are dirty again. Here's the brand new pad, never been worn. Here's the one I took off. Okay, you can see they're really still new. They were only about a quarter used. See? Pretty much new. These, like I said, did not need to be replaced because of wear. But these are better. Hopefully. They should be. They should be a heck of a lot better. But anyway, what was I saying? Oh man, I lost my train of thought. We're compressing the piston. Oh, I guess that's what we were doing. Yeah, let's do that. Totally lost that train of thought. Oh, I just realized. Okay, yeah. We need to compress the piston because these pads that we took off, now normally when you're doing a brake job, you're going to have a lot less meat left. So they're going to be a lot thinner. That means that your piston is going to be out more because, this is what I get for just deviating. Yeah, don't touch the grease. Very bad. Okay. Now I'm going to have to go wash my hands before I do the next step. Anyway, when you normally change your brakes, your pads are going to be a lot more worn, so they're going to be thinner. That means your piston is going to be extended a lot more. This one is barely out. When it's flush, that's pretty much brand new. So that's what we have to get it down to. So we have to push this back in. And we do that by using the old inside brake pad. And you can see here is the contact for the piston. This is the pressure area. And all we're going to do, stick this back in here. So it's sitting on that cup evenly. And now I'm going to get a C-clamp, and we're just going to squeeze that piston back down and basically open this up so we can slide it over the new brake pads. So let me go wash my hands, put some more gloves on, get a C-clamp, and we'll compress that piston. So there we go. Doesn't take much. Now in some vehicles, especially in rear brakes, you can't do this. Some pistons, for example, we had Mini Coopers, and the rears had to be ratcheted and screwed back into place. They don't just go in and out. They make special tools for it. You can kind of do it yourself using needle nose pliers, but check with your service manual. Again, this is for a Kia, and most vehicles are exactly like this. Absolutely nothing special. You just push it back in. Once you've taken that top off your brake reservoir, there's no pressure. So that's all you need to do. But again, check with your service manual to make sure that that's how your piston gets pushed back in. Because if it's another type and you push it back in, you can damage your piston assembly, and that's a few $100. So now we're ready to slide this back over. I'm going to loosen my wire here that I've hung it up on. without poking myself through the gloves. That steel wire's sharp. I tell you, it's hard to do fine stuff with gloves on. You can't feel what you're doing. Come on. There we go. Couldn't find the end. Again, just be careful not to let it drop and put pressure on your brake line. That's the only thing you have to worry about. Now you just slide this over your new brake pads. And rebolt that into place. And again, this just takes an open end to hold this side. It takes a 17. Oh, that's right. That was the 17 that I broke. Which means I need to go find another open end 17 standby. Well, wouldn't you know it, that was the only open end 17 I had, so I've got some needle nose here. We just need to hold this nut snug while we spin the back one. It's nothing critical. We're not putting high torque on this nut or anything. There's one. Here's two. All right, she's ready to get the wheel back. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. But that is all there is to doing your basic brake job with changing the rotors. Nothing to be scared about, nothing complicated. Up north, Rust Belt cars may be a pain in the butt, but they all function the same. And again, this completely straightens up as soon as you put your wheel back on. That's it. See you guys next time.